Welcome. The following is a conversation between Andrew Hayes from Cubic Consulting and one of our clients on the 19th of November 2013 as we discuss social authentication in the context of Oracle's mobile and social servers. Enjoy. The focus of this call is actually supposed to be just an overview of what mobile and social can provide. It's also aimed at a sort of a technical level or technical management level to get a feel for the complexity of what's to be installed, and also things along the lines of if you already have OAM, what it takes to actually bump it up to mobile and social. Okay, there's two separate presentations that we're going to do. The first one is the social one. That's today, and there's another one with mobile if you're interested in that, which will probably be later in the year. Anyway, okay. So let's get through here. Let's minimize this. All right, so. I'll skip the marketing blurb. The key thing here that the mobile and social stuff out of Oracle does is it allows you to engage customers who aren't previously or loosely engaged with your organization. So we've got a number of clients, telcos, cable companies, that sort of thing. And what you'll find is that there's a large number of people on the periphery of those who either are thinking of picking up an account or perhaps are asking questions on their community websites. And so what we're providing is the ability to easily capture those users to simplify registration. Or if you're not interested in registration, just allow them to not have to create another local account, right? No one likes either one of two profiles, right? Everybody uses the same password for every account that they ever create because they can't be bothered remembering all the small ones, or they treat it as an impediment and just don't engage, okay? So if you can log in with your Facebook account or log in with your Google account, this is the sort of use case that we're trying to solve with this demonstration. In addition to that, we're also providing you the ability to capture that information. So to make the transition from someone who doesn't want to log into your site, but if presented with all of the data and all they have to do is type in a password, it lowers the barrier really quite significantly. Okay, which is great for your marketing department. Great way of finding out who these people are. All right, so just talk you through. What I've got here is a really simplistic version of what your architecture will look like. Specifically, it uses browsing into your data center. You've got reverse proxies in a DMZ somewhere, one or more applications behind that, and a data store behind. Nothing particularly amazing here. You also have to fold into this architectural diagram now all of the third-party identity providers that you may want to interact with, and that'll be a product of your business. The ones I've listed on this screen are the ones that come out of the box with the Oracle product that you can integrate with essentially about a page of configuration, most of which you don't have to touch. So it's a really simple and interesting way of being able to bootstrap up your user base or provide a capability. You are able to simply allow your users from the outside world to just come straight into your environment. You still have to solve the what should I trust these people to do, but that's a separate conversation around rights and what have you. But it does simplify the acquisition of these people, and it does improve their user experience. Okay, so the next couple of slides that I've got really describe the technical problem. So this is the interaction between the user's browser and the demonstration VM that I've got, and I'll walk you through a real-time sequence after the slides. But it also shows you what the requests are, what the handoff is to the third-party identity provider, what the information exchange is, and how you can control that. So it's very much a technical overview, 60,000-foot view. All right. Sure. So in this VM that I've got, we're just going to run against a VM on my laptop at the moment. I've set up Google. So Google is our identity provider. As on the previous slide, you had Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, all of that sort of stuff. Any OAuth or OpenID provider is actually really easy to integrate. But if you wanted to go beyond that to other schemes, they're doable as well. And I'll sort of cover that.
Andrew, I've got a quick question.
Yeah, sure.
Here we are leveraging identities from a social login or social provider.
Yep.
So it's actually outside of the domain of let's say outside of a business domain, of an organization's domain. So we are actually using social identities or creating federation between social identities and a business
Yep,
environment, isn't it?
that's correct. It's a
Yeah.
slightly simpler version of that use case though. So when you talk about federation, it implies a
Mhm.
partnership. Okay.
Yeah.
There is actually federation here. You are setting up a Google session. That Google session is being handed over. It's being interrogated, and then some information is being exchanged. So there is federation here, but it's not as heavyweight as you would typically expect between partners, for example, where not only is the federation occurring, but also assertions are being made that should be trusted or for some defined
Yeah.
level of trust. So I used to work with one of our previous clients did car part catalogs for the major car vendors, and they had a full federation happening where Toyota users were able to fully access their system based on assertions from a Toyota. But that's a very strong trust relationship. Okay.
Yeah.
Um, this is a lot less trustful. I mean, I've got on Facebook. I've got a friend called the Baron. Would I let the Baron access a web service that perhaps would allow them access to
Yeah.
financial data? Probably not. But I would allow them to
Mm.
access a public forum, for example, and maybe make some posts under their name. So it's that sort of level of interaction where this thing offers, but it also
Mm.
again, it solves the registration issue. These users that log in via Facebook or via Google or whatever, you don't own those users. Google owns those users or Facebook owns those users. By,
Right.
by allowing registration, you can capture some of that data. Okay, so you don't, while it's still a Google user account, it still might be some way for you to keep in contact or to provide the kernel of an account that they might then segue onto your systems and start working. Um,
Yep.
anyway, so that's the aim of this product, and that's the problem it tries to solve. It does it really simply for you. So if you already have OAM, you can step up to mobile and social very, very simply.
Okay.
The only other thing I'll mention, so we've got this sort of architecture on the VM. There's a web gate for the policy enforcement point. We've got Oracle Access Manager for the policy decision point. So what URLs are you able to access? I've got a demonstration application here. That demonstration app does nothing more than it's got a couple of JSON services for the mobile session I'll do later in the year, but it's also got a test web application that will show you any of the user data that is injected into the request headers between the web gate. So the web gate will modify the request to send some information through to the demo app, which allows you to do some personalization or do some further lookups. And the data store, of course, is where we store local copies of the users after they've gone through registration. Okay.
Right.
All right. So let's quickly race through the request because you probably already know this anyway. Okay. So anytime someone makes an initial request, tries to access a protected resource on your system, there's a HTTP GET or POST or something that goes in here. Okay. And the web gate will detect that this is something where the user has to identify themselves. Okay, so that's the first request. Nothing gets past your DMZ. It's not involved at this point. But what actually happens is the web gate will redirect you off to the configured identity. Sorry, I take that back. It redirects you off to a local login page, and that login page has all of the login options that you can provide, whether that's a standard local login, exactly the same as what you've seen before, again, log in against a record that you might have in a data store locally, but it'll also have a number of buttons if you wanted to log in via an external identity provider. In the demo, you'll see that there's just one Google button, although if I wanted to add Facebook or Twitter or whatever, they would just be additional buttons in that same panel. Okay, so that initial request takes you to a login page. Once you collect the details or you select an external party that you want to authenticate against, it does the handoff. Okay, so this is where it redirects you. It's an HTTP 302 request. It says, come over here and log in via, in this case, it's accounts.google.com. Okay, so establish your credentials. And that identification, it's not an authorization step, it's an identification at this point. So this identification can cover simple username and password as you're used to. But I've also configured the demo to show you if you had two-factor authentication set up. So not only establish my username and password, but also enter a soft token. I've got the Google Authenticator app on my phone here. And what I'll do is it'll prompt me to enter that second factor. I'll enter that data, and only then will it continue on and pass a session back. All right. Okay, so we've got authentication. The good thing about this type of thing, there's two separate use cases I probably should mention here. Because these external providers are often highly used websites, so often users have a window open, whether it's a Facebook window or their Google Mail. Often these things are already there, open in the background. So of course a session is already present and established. So what you'll find is in those cases, the users will bounce over to their external party, but they won't need to re-authenticate. The session will already be open, and that session will then be passed immediately back. So for the user's perspective, they've had to do nothing, and they're automatically logged onto your site, or at least passed into the registration page. Okay. So beyond that, let me go to the third step. All right. So once you've been handed off and you've established your session, the third party will pass back a session token, so an identifier for a session that's active on Google, okay, or Facebook. I'll just use Google from here on in. So that session is handed back to the webgate. The webgate detects that handback has happened, but it doesn't take its word for it. It'll pass the token off to Access Manager. Access Manager will then make a callback, one or more callbacks to the identity provider to establish that the session has been correctly set up. B, it'll also do the attribute transfer, so you configure what attributes you want to make available out of Google. So that information is exchanged at this point after the session has been established. So by this stage, not only does it know that there's a valid session, it has all of the configured attributes about the user, the Google user, available to make decisions on at that point. Okay. From there, what it will do is it will offer if you're not present in the local data store, it will pop you up a registration page. Okay, that registration page will allow you to do all of the capture using the data it's collected, and all the user has to do is enter a password. Then the data's stored, captured, which is great, and that could be used for future logins if you need to. And after that, your user has been established, and the initial request is now allowed through. Okay, so you've been passed back. Session has been established locally using the session that was created on your identity provider, and the request is proxied through to your demonstration application, or to your application. Sorry, in our case, it's a demo app which will show all of the user data that the webgate passes back. Okay, and there's an optional step after that. Because one of the fields is the user identifier, so a primary key. You can configure what that primary key is. I've just used the email address. But if you can configure what that user looks like, you can supply whatever information so that you don't have the applications don't have to always go back to the data store to get the rest of the data. But you can, if you want to, say, look, this is Andrew.Hayes, fantastic. I'll look him up and I'll get his color preferences, and maybe that's important to the application or whatever. But the application, instead of asking for someone to log in, they assume that if they've received a request, the user has logged in, and they are supplied that data as to which user is currently accessing the system. Okay, so it's a quick flip around. The application does not care about security. The application acts upon assertions from the webgate that this user is securely logged in.
Right. So, Andrew, one quick question about the identity provider registration. So, before Oracle Access Manager creates an assertion to Google, so Google has to be registered as an identity provider in Access Manager.
That's correct.
Yeah.
We'll go through that. There's only a couple of things you have to be concerned about in the config. Firstly, you check. It's a checkbox to say which providers you want, if from the out of the box options, that is. So you set up a checkbox. I've only checked one, and we'll show you that. But once you've done that, there's a mapping. Okay, so by default, each of these providers will offer a fixed number of fields. Both are configurable from both sides. So if you wanted to set up a Google application that would give you more data, you could do that if you controlled that Google application. If you don't, then you have to go with the standard stuff. But once you've got that, then you have a mapping table that says this attribute I want mapped to this attribute locally. Same for attribute 2, attribute 3, etc. So I'll show you that table, and for most of the things that you want to do, it will be an architectural decision. But really, most clients that we work with just say, look, for phase 1, we're just going to go with the default information, and that'll give us a seed. And in which case, if you follow the same path, there's no work for you. You basically you say, I want Google, and then it sets the rest of it up for you. Okay, so let's do a quick run through. Let's do a quick run through ourselves. Before I do this, I'll show you, as part of the demonstration, there's this is what it looks like. So I'll be accessing authenticated requests via the web gate, which is port 7777. Okay. But to show you the negative case as well, I'll bypass. So you wouldn't get this in a proper production environment. You'd never be able to bypass the web gate. But what I'll do is I'll browse directly via port 7001 to the demo app to show you that that there's no attributes inserted if you hit the application directly, which shows that they're being inserted via the web gate. Yeah.
Right.
All right. Okay. So let's get this going. I'll just pop over to Firefox here. All right. So let's just quickly go. So I'm going direct to start off with. Okay, so I've got a web application here. Now, as you saw before, port 7001. So all I'm doing is hitting my servlet directly, and it says, yeah, I can't find any attributes inserted by OAM, so there's nothing to display. So let's show you the login sequence. Okay, so if I change that to 7777, okay, hit enter. And suddenly I'm redirected. Okay, so it's a protected resource. I have on the right-hand side here, if I wanted to log in via a local account, then that's what I would do. That sequence is no different to any other sequence you would have seen. It just looks up the OUD data store, pulls back the account if it's available, and checks the password against it, and then lets you in. But we're not going to do that, of course. It's a social demo. So if I click on Google, oops, sorry, my mistake. Let me close that. What I have done is gone full screen, and full screen is great, but it doesn't allow pop-ups properly. Okay, so sign in with other account. I prefer a pop-up. So now I'm actually on accounts.google.com. You can see. So this account I set up previously is just test.qbitter. It's one of our test accounts. The password's already there, but I can click sign in, and as I mentioned before, the two-factor authentication prompt pops up. So basically, all I'm doing here is just entering a number off my phone. Okay, that should be it. Fabulous. Okay, so it's let me through. There's a warning dialog here. I haven't set up certificates. This is the certificate warning that all browsers will provide. If you had a proper registered certificate, this dialog wouldn't appear. So let me just continue. Great. And hit registration. So as far as it's concerned, this is the first time that I've gone through registration. There's no test qbitter account available in the data store that I've got set up. So it says, look, this is the information I've got back from Google. It's got last name, common name, first name, and then my login ID, which is just I've configured to be the email address. All I have to do at this point is type in a password, and hey presto, it's gone. Okay, so that's now been injected into my local data store, which I'll show you in just a sec. So it's redirected me back to the show headers page that I showed you before, but this time there's all of this information that's been injected basically by the reverse proxy. Okay, so it's just what's my user ID. This is always present, along with this internal value, which is where did I get this identity from? Because you can have multiple identity stores. An example of that might be perhaps you have a master AD store somewhere where users are provisioned internally, and you might have another data store for public users. They're two separate user groups. You might have two separate identity stores, and you can figure those up. These other two values, the common name and the surname, they're the ones that would allow me to do simple personalization, such as welcome test qbitter, on my homepage without having to go to a data store to do a subsequent lookup. It's just that sort of data, and you can optimize those by adding or removing values. You have access to any piece of data that Access Manager has access to. Okay, you can inject all of that if you wanted to into every request. All right, so that's the really simple part of it. That's the simple login flow. There's one step that I must highlight. There's a mistake on my part. I didn't show you the identity request, the authorization request. I must have forgotten to clear that out. So there's one extra step that you would see for the first time. So when I logged in via Google, there would be one additional page if this was the first time that I'd ever encountered that. And that is do you allow the application poc.qbitconsulting.com to have access to your user data? Do you remember those requests? You might have seen it for Facebook or Yeah, it will ask you those. I'll just briefly do a quick divergence and show you what I mean. So if I go to accounts.google.com, the session is still there, of course, because of my login. So it's test Qubiter, and it's there we go, review permissions, connected applications and sites. Oops, forcing me to log back in again. That's fine. Okay, so you see, I've previously actually said yes to that question before, so I didn't ask it. If I wanted to do that again, I could just hit revoke access. So next time it tries to log back in, it'll say, hang on a second, do you want to provide access? But you haven't seen that step. Would you like me to repeat that for you, or are you quite comfortable without it?
No, that's fine. That's fine.
No worries. Okay. My apologies. It's a problem of running demos. You invariably forget a step. Okay. So let's take you through the log into the OAM console and show you what configuration is required to set this stuff up. And again, I'm not going to walk you through a how-to. We actually do have a full run book for building this virtual machine that I've used for the demonstration today. If you get us involved, we can share that with you so that you can basically do this all yourself. But one of the things that we do is I'll show you. Let me take a step back. Sorry. What I wanted to do here is just to show you the three separate areas of config that you'd need to get from a default OAM install up to a mobile and social capability. And it's to show you the order of magnitude, the amount of config that you would have there. So you'd have an estimate for saying, well, look, this is a day's task, not a month's task. You know what I mean? So let's just go through some of that stuff. All right. So firstly, the very first thing that you have to do when interacting with this system is you have to basically enable the mobile and social stuff. So there's the available services available in the default config, or you can go via the panel here. So mobile and social comes with every OAM installation. Okay, when you they're technically integrated, but they're not licensed the same. I've got to be clear here. They are a separate licensable line item when you're speaking to the Oracle reps. Anyway, in terms of turning this thing on, it's a matter of coming into this panel and clicking on the enable button, which gives you this green tick. So you can see I've got the security token and identity federation turned off. But if I hit enable and turn it on, it gives me access to all of the functionality that's available in the mobile and social tab. Okay, so if I just close that and come over here, okay, and show you these, I'll just close the mobile stuff because it's a mobile demonstration is for later. Okay, so that's the first piece of information, how to turn the thing on. The second thing is, the second tranche of information is the application profile. So when you are setting up each application, you can configure a different application profile. So for example, one internal application might require higher security than another. Therefore, for that application, perhaps logging in with your Google ID might not be appropriate, whereas a local community board might be something that definitely does want your Google ID to be available. So, you can set up a profile for each application, or you can just set up a main one and use those rules for everything. It depends on how your business runs. Okay. There are three separate sections on this page, the application profile page. The out-of-the-box identity providers. As you can see, any OAuth and OpenID identity providers are very easily done, and the main ones are already built in. Second thing is the service provider interfaces. So OAM has a very clear and well-defined authentication pipeline. What steps are followed in what order. This is covered in detail in the OAM Administrator's Guide. But if you wanted to build your own, if you had a custom authentication requirement, then we'd start talking about building a service provider interface of your own. Okay, maybe overriding one of the major steps or one or more of the major steps, or it's up to you. It depends on the business requirement. I won't go into that in this talk because that's very much a developer level thing. There's a developer guide that I'd recommend you go and have a look at if you're interested in something like that. And the final one are the application profiles. So this is where I'll show you how much information is required to set the demonstration that I showed you up. And it's basically one page of data. That's it. Sorry, I don't know how quickly you can scroll with me with your view of the screen, but it's one page of configuration, and that's all. Let's drag this back up. Okay, so the top part I'll ignore for the time being. This is very much how does OAM and the WebGate interact. It's that level of config. The second one, however, starts to get interesting. So this is how does your application interact with the third-party identity provider. In this setting, I'd configured it to show both local and internet identity provider authentication. So you saw on your login screen, there was on the right-hand side a local login, which would not go to Google. It would just look up your local data store. On the left-hand side is the list of identity providers that you've configured. Okay.
Yeah.
The second step is, do you want this to be popped up or do you want it to be inline? So pop-up is what you saw. There's a nice little pop-up over the top, and then it'll go and do all of the interactions and then come back to the page that you've initially requested. I prefer that, and most of the customers seem to want that as well. It does have the benefit of not interfering with your page design or page layout if you've already got an existing app. But if you wanted to select no, what that would do is it'd redirect you off from the main page, basically, and you'd only have one browser window.
Yeah, without getting any pop-up.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And that's not a huge impact either. It's very much a personal preference at that point. User registration, so enabled or disabled. I've got enabled, obviously, and you've seen the rego step. Yeah, no, that's cool. You would want to disable user rego if it doesn't make sense, or you want people to always log in with their Google IDs, or you have a static user base, such as it's provisioned via another channel, and you don't want people to register. You only want to use the data that's already there, pre-validated. Anyway, so that's how those work. These are the attributes. So it's a simple table of these are the attributes that you want to extract from, you want to store. Okay, and these are the ones that are available that pass through to the users. And the final bits are, these are the mappings between these attributes and the ones that come from your identity provider. Okay, so as you can see over here, I've specified that the login ID, the primary key, is going to be the same as the email that I get from Google, and I map it into 2 places. Okay, and then after that, let's just simply select the ones you want: Yahoo, Google, LinkedIn, Twitter, or Facebook. That's it. Okay, pretty simple. So the final piece of configuration that I'll show you is where you get the control over. Where you get the control over what information is supplied to the users. Okay, so I've got my OAM application. It's not very creatively named, but bear with me. So this basically is the policy that specifies how I'm protecting my website. And as you can see here, I've got a default rule which allows everything through. Qubit demo services, I've specified as a protected resource. Same with Welcome Index, it's a protected resource. When you hit a protected resource, that triggers the authorization rules and forces you to log in. Otherwise, it doesn't interfere. And in the authorization policies, in my protected resource policy, in the response section, here are the headers that I inject. Okay, I don't know if you've got a Java background, but this is Java JEEL syntax. So specify an object and then dot attribute, subattribute, dot subattribute. And there is a user attribute that's associated with the session, and that user has attributes, and of course then you can refer to them by name, and they just map onto the same names that you get from the underlying directory. So any directory attribute that you want, you have access to, and there are more attributes besides. You have, from this screen, you have access to all of the information that OAM has to make decisions. So from that, that's pretty much it. If you have any questions, I'm more than happy to go through them at this point. As I mentioned before, we also have pretty much this as a standard offering. Whereas if you have an OAM install or want to get us involved, we take the users through what it looks like in their environment. We'll build something for them in the non-production environment to kick tires. It's a very standard thing, and we'll leave you with a blow-by-blow run book. I think it's 177 pages worth of screenshots. But anyway, it's one of the things I got one of the guys to put together for me for while he had about a week.